Okay, we're back with Peace Pilgrim. This is the fourth episode, the fourth portion of this, Steps Towards Inner Peace. And I do suggest, and of course, if you're joining live, very cool, but I do suggest going back to catch the earlier portions because it will help put it together. Peace Pilgrim, we call her a great saint. She had become one with the great peace, which is our own highest nature. We can call it peace, we can call it love, we can call it joy. It is the same, the unity of life, which is at our center. And these three groups that she's exploring are really, when we speak of yoga and what is yoga or Buddhism or other spiritual paths, these three, which she's addressing very, very simply, beautifully simply, yes? Mm-hmm. These are really the elements, and it is the preparations, which is when we first begin to realize that there's more to this life than meets the eye, and that what I'm seeking, happiness, of course, or peace, or fullness, or joy, is not to be attained by worldly pursuit alone. And so, in other words, the I, me, mine train, the whole thing about I need, I want, we can get whatever we want, and we need to go through the process to learn, but what we learn invariably is there's more to it, or less to it, and we could say that, and that's probably more true. It's simpler than that, and it relates to being in touch with my own highest nature and being aligned with my own highest nature. So, preparations, purifications, which are really the work, and then relinquishments, which is the letting go of. In Sanskrit, tyaga, which is renunciation, and that has exactly the same meaning actually as the word relinquishment here. It's simply letting go beautifully, gently, but completely as well. And so we're going to step through these. Again, there's an order to them. As she would say, they're not to be taken specifically in this particular order. They're taken as we encounter. And we'll see also in these relinquishments that they're very much interrelated. So let's begin with the first of the relinquishment.
Number one, relinquishment of self-will. You have, or it's as though you have, two selves. The lower self that usually governs you selfishly, and the higher self which stands ready to use you gloriously. You must subordinate the lower self by refraining from doing the not good things you are motivated toward, not suppressing them, but transforming them so that the higher self can take over your life.
Oh, thank you. So, there aren't really two, and she says this, but we are needful of doing the work of alignment, coming into alignment. These two, we could call them psychologically the ego nature and the intuitive nature. And there are other ways to relate to them as well. The great religious traditions and spiritual traditions, etc., have other terminologies, but this is fine. The center of us, which perpetuates an idea, a worldview, that it's about me and I come first. And yeah, this view is held and we'll see it around us, but we see it around us because it starts in us. It's not actually us. It is this ego center. It is this protection mechanism, which is in the mind and my identity, as it were. And then the center, the view, the perspective of our conscience or our intuitive nature, which is all inclusive. And each of us have experience, and we'll try, in fact, to see what is the difference between instinctive intuitive or my conscience. I'll tell you a little story here. When I first had really begun the practice of yoga, and I was really paying attention, and it's after a few years, very deep depression and letting go of things that weren't serving, and an interest in a full way of life, in a way of living which was beneficial for all, honestly. In seeking of this, I began getting fed, and it's a system of yoga, and the great yogis, saints and sages of yoga, Swami Shivananda foremost among them, but Paramahansa Yogananda, of course, and many, many. I was practicing and then joining satsang, etc., and listening, and I heard something that I did not like, and that was, I heard that adopting a vegetarian diet would be beneficial because it would help in purification of thoughts. And I didn't like it because I liked my meat and fish and like this. And I'll tell you honestly, the I that likes my stuff, that is the ego center, and the urge towards adopting approaches to life that free us from limited ways of seeing life, the strife, the division, putting these on the altar, that's our conscience or intuitive nature. And I'll just say in yoga, and I'm not trying to make anyone do anything, we're just sharing here. In yoga, this thing about diet, actually, of course, there are moral considerations that many will espouse, and all of the things that we hold to be true, they have a place in the scheme of things. They do. But in yoga, the reason, the methodology, and the philosophy underlying is that whatever we eat, the energy of it becomes part of the mind, and it perpetuates our thoughts. For example, I'll share that if you experience nightmares, repetitive nightmares, you might find, or even one or two, you might find that at night you're eating very hot, spicy foods. There's a direct relationship. So there's a science of yoga, and Peace Pilgrim, even though she doesn't call herself a yogi, very much a yogi. And so, okay. So here's the thing. I finally heard enough, and I decided, okay, well, let's see. And so I asked inside this question. And the question is, should I stop eating meat? And honest to God, it freaked me out how fast the answer came. And so the conscience, the intuitive nature, no doubt, because the guidance that I received was beneficial. It was beneficial for me, and it was beneficial for all, because it contributed to coming to a place of peace and kindness and compassion and consideration and the ability to listen and to hear and to tune like this, the capacity to be kind, to not react to challenging circumstances as if they're a big problem, but take them as an opportunity to learn and adapt and grow like this. So I contributed. And I would say it's not the diet so much, it's the fact that I began to tune to my highest nature, actually. The fact that I began to subordinate my lower nature, the ego nature, to the highest nature. And what she's sharing is correct. We can't suppress it. And we all, even though we don't want to admit it outside, and we don't even want to admit it to ourselves, we all engage in mindless activities. We all say things that we wish we wouldn't have said. We do things that we wish we wouldn't have done. And frankly, we think things that we wish we wouldn't have thought. And that's actually where it's starting. Our difficulties is in the thought natures, the repetitive thought natures, the subconscious, unconscious mind. And so, okay, I'll tell you the rest of the story. So I stopped eating meat. And did I notice a shift? Yeah, over time, absolutely. It was quite significant. Do I tell you that you have to do it? No, I don't tell anybody anything, as I said. I'm just sharing. I encourage you to investigate life. And I encourage you to develop a deep relationship with your own highest self. That's what's important. And come into alignment with our own highest self. That is the way of peace. Okay. So here's the rest of this is pre-Swami days. Okay, so it freaked me out how fast the answer came. And of course it was prescient, and of course I did it. I had to do it because the only choice that I had at that point was to go against myself or to take my guidance from my highest self, which clearly was. But I chose not to see fish as me. And so, for months, I refused to ask myself whether I should stop eating fish. Every now and then the thought would come up, and I would choose, no, I'm not going to ask. And of course, I eventually asked. So I'm not saying what Peace Pilgrim is giving here, I'm not saying it's easy. But I'm saying in a way it's actually very simple. Mm-hmm. Now, what peace tells us about this is that inner peace, it's really this step, this particular relinquishment. You see, it's never possible to be a unity, to be in alignment with the ego sense. Because honestly, the ego sense can't be satisfied. It can't be filled. It's an artificial, it's an imaginary idea of how I could be satisfied. If I get this, if I get that, if people treated me this way or that way, if I could do this, if I could live there, if I could have that job, if I could have this amount of money. Now, I've lived this dream, and here's the issue. It can't be satisfied. That sense cannot be satisfied. So there's no possibility to actually come into alignment with it. If this makes sense, that is, and we try to satisfy it, but I feel like everyone watching this far has learned that it's not possible to satisfy it. And so to the extent that we continue to put the ego sense, this lower nature, on the altar of our life, we put it up here and we work for it, we revere it, even though we don't think of it, we do what it says, what the lower nature says. It says, you need to cut off this relationship because they don't respect me, they don't understand me, and I'm wasting my time. I need to do this, this, and this. I need to have this, this, and this. And of course, it's all about happiness and being happy, but it's a long list of demands which are actually disconnected from happiness. In yoga, we would say it's rooted in avidya, ignorance, primal nescience, which is this identity of me as a separate entity. We're not separate. We are each cells in the body of humanity. It's one way to relate. And so, to the extent that I try to please it, try to satisfy it, it just can't work. I remain divided. I remain ill at ease, not at ease, no peace, a state of dis-ease. And mental dis-ease is also physical dis-ease. Everything's connected to it if we allow for it. So there's no peace trying to satisfy it. However, this higher nature is all-inclusive. It is in touch with the good of the whole. Ultimately, it is that which is good for the whole, which is freedom, peace, joy, which is the fullness of self. And this we learn when we when we subordinate, and this is so key, the lower natures, when we tune ourselves within ourselves to our highest nature. And I gave you an example. When we begin to ask questions inside, when we practice receptive silence, and this is one of the practices that Peace had spoken about, when we connect more and more to our highest nature, and then what does it mean, abandonment of self-will? It means I learn that the way life works is if I try to please the lower nature, I'm divided. If I work for the good of the whole, I'm united. Mm-hmm. And so I must at some point give up my interest in pleasing myself for my own good. Mm-hmm. For the good of the whole, yes, it's the same. But for my own good. If I know what's good for me, if I know how to be happy, I will lose interest in pleasing myself. And I'll find myself mysteriously pleased on the other side of it, because peace is pleasant. And inner peace is really the great attainment in life. Mm-hmm. So this is the point. It doesn't mean to give up and suppress and say life isn't worth. I get that these ideas come. It doesn't mean this at all. Abandonment of self-will does not mean giving up on life. It means learning to tune myself to the highest natures, to my highest self. So funny enough, in yoga, typically in the translation of the Upanishads and such, we see self spelled with a small s, meaning the ego self, and capital S, meaning this intuitive self. Mm-hmm. And so abandoning self-will means tuning to self-will, capital S, and which is freedom, happiness, fullness. This, we would say, is universal will. Mm-hmm. So, question?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of questions that might be, applicable to a wider, modern audience. And I think one thing that's so prevalent is this idea of trust yourself. Trust, find your inner sense of trust. But then when we take this journey and we learn, oh, I'm not so trustworthy. There's an aspect of me. Yeah. And so it can be very sort of destabilizing. And I think everything we're walking through helps us find the stability, but maybe some words directly to that.
Well, life lived and investigated. If we live it, if we pay attention, if we investigate it, life is like a grand science experiment. It really is. And that is, if the fruit of life, if the things that I experience and the way that I experience, they're like a petri dish. I put stuff in it, and then something grows in it, and I experience it in the way that it grows. And so here's what we all will learn if we pay close attention. And that is that if I put judgment and separation and anger and hatred, and I keep putting myself first, I plant these seeds, then what grows is obnoxious, and I think that they're obnoxious. I'm living in an obnoxious world. But the world I'm living in is right here. If anyone knows of Dr. Emoto, a number of people still hear about him, works with water, and he was doing this beautiful work with energy, initially by taking water from different sources and freezing a drop and looking at it and seeing the crystals that formed when it froze. But later on, he started looking at the energy of words, and he found this tremendous difference between a word hate and the word love. Regardless of the language, there's an underlying vibration. And this is what we're tapping when we work with mantra, for example, is this underlying vibration. And what he discovered is is that you could actually see the beauty that is inherent in the vibration of the word love, and you could see the darkness that was inherent in the vibration of the word hate. And our minds and our lives were constantly stewing in these vibrations. Either these higher vibrations of love, compassion, kindness, etc., and our life becomes bright, our life experience becomes bright, and that is our intuitive nature. That is the nature of the intuitive self. Or we're stewing in the very base anger, hatred, fear, etc., and we become darker and darker. And so, yeah, trust yourself. Ultimately, that's your own real self, of course. Your conscience. Your conscience, your deepest reality, who and what you really are. And it's learning to trust this. And of course, we also learn that there are aspects of me that are not trustworthy. And so what's being shared here is then let me make of them instruments of my own highest nature. Let me make of this entire mind and body a servant of the highest nature, my highest nature, which works for the good of the whole alone, which is always loving, which never creates conflicts, which resolves conflicts, which allows me to enter a situation with great conflict in a family or whatever, and there's a resolution there because I've tuned this instrument to it. And that's why we say suppressing is not the answer. Suppressing just makes us more divided and more ill at ease. But yes, we learn what we can trust, and the rest of it we learn to get it into alignment. And we align our lower natures, the subconscious, the unconscious, the reactive natures, and they become instruments for the common benefit, or for the good of all. Oh, okay, so let's move on. This is the big, in terms of the relinquishments, this is the big one. The others are related, you'll see. But honest to God, this one is what resolves all conflict within ourselves. And when conflict is resolved within ourselves, then we become peacemakers. We have the capacity to be unaffected by expressions of conflict. And that's addressed here a little bit later. In other words, it doesn't throw us off, which allows us to find the common ground. Oh, please.
Number 2 is relinquishment of the feeling of separateness. All of us, all over the world, are cells in the body of humanity. You are not separate from your fellow humans, and you cannot find harmony for yourself alone. You can only find harmony when you realize the oneness of all and work for the good of all.
Oh. I just want to point out, this follows the discussion we've been having about working for the good of all. But I want to point out that something that she says that will be perhaps very hard to relate to, and that is relinquishment of the feeling of separateness. In yoga psychology, when the great yogis, simply meaning when we have cleared ourselves and come into the clear, when we no longer harbor ill feelings, ill will, etc., then we enter into a pure state of life. We call it the real life. The real life of love and compassion and kindness and unity. The real life. And we encourage this real life is the real life. It is the life that we've actually been looking for outside. So the yogis who who share these teachings with us, including Peace Pilgrim, of course, tell us that we're not actually separate, that we're experiencing a sensation, a sense of separateness. And this is very early on. We experience it mostly in waking state, to a lesser extent in dream state. It is an arising in the mind. It is a sense of I and a sense of lack from which longing arises, and a sense of separation. We have the feeling that I'm here and you're there. And I get that's the whole common discussion. But you know, we live in an age where modern science has actually discovered that from a material sense, that there's not actually any separation. Freaky. That until we go in deeper, that essentially the essence, the material of which this body is made and the material of which that body is made, this space is made of the same material. Mm-hmm. And so if you look at it at the quantum level, quantum field, you won't see any separation between it. And in fact, that the cells, the material of this body are constantly moving through it. And so I'll move on, but I will say, essentially, we're not actually separate. At one level, we're all parts of a unity. And at another level, at the depth of us, there's one intuitive nature. Just allow for it. I'm not telling you to go tell all your friends, okay, here's what it means. Study it yourself, investigate it yourself. So it's a feeling of separation. And what we learn, honest to God, is that at some point it's possible to set it aside. What does that mean? Practically speaking, it means no longer feeling separate. Can you take a moment and imagine that? No longer feeling separate. What anyone is experiencing is your own experience. No longer feeling that they're other than you. No longer feeling a longing or a sense of lack. It doesn't mean that you don't live your life. Of course you live your life. But maybe a little taste. So it's possible to actually at some point recognize not separate and set it aside. Just like, we're all learning and growing here. Just as at some point we set our toys aside and entered a new phase of life, so too we set the feeling of separation aside and enter a new phase of life. So let's go to number 3.
Relinquishment of attachments. Only when you have relinquished all attachments can you really be free. Material things are here for use, and anything you cannot relinquish when it has outlived its usefulness possesses you. You can only live in harmony with your fellow humans if you have no feeling that you possess them, and therefore do not try to run their lives.
So you could say, if it's true that in relinquishing self-will, the first step, that you discover inner peace, that you find yourself to be in alignment without dis-ease or discord, then what's this about, this relinquishment of attachments? It's interesting. These are subconscious, unconscious supports that we've created within the psyche, which we've become dependent upon in their views, and they're not serving In fact, you find, step by step, that that which is to be depended upon is whole and complete, your own highest self, what we call God, but not a person in any traditional sense. The fullness, which is at the center of each of us, which we can't actually get away from, and which we don't want to get away from. And so the attachments, it turns out, are limiters to us, and not just limiters to us as an individual, but limiters to us in community as well. In particular, the point that she mentions about our relationships with people, and these are very much habituated. The whole thing about my family, and it's okay, fine, outside, externally, to say my family, but to see this is my son and actually try to run his life because it's my son. This is my wife and try to control her because she's mine. This is my dog. This is my cat. And you see how it leads to anger and all of these other feelings when they don't do what you want them to do because they're an extension of you. And so this one's very pernicious and one more relinquishment.
Number 4 is relinquishment of all negative feelings. Work on relinquishing negative feelings. If you live in the present moment, which is really the only moment you have to live, you will be less apt to worry. If you realize that those who do mean things are psychologically ill, your feelings of anger will turn to feelings of pity. If you recognize that all of your inner hurts are caused by your own wrong actions, or your own wrong reactions, or your own wrong inaction, then you will stop hurting yourself.
I'm going to read a little bit more the long form of what she's sharing here. These are her words from the interview. And it might be helpful here in terms of seeing the potentialities and what we're dealing with. So she shares one last comment about negative feelings, which helped me very much at one time and has helped others. And what she's sharing now is a realization, and also she actualized it. She put it into practice. No outward thing, nothing, nobody from without can hurt me inside psychologically. Here, I remember early on being exposed to this in yoga, these words. If somebody tells you that you're a donkey, how does that change you? Do you grow a tail and 2 more legs? I mean, you see the hurt that we feel when someone says, you don't get it, you're stupid, or you're doing the wrong thing, or you need, that hurt is purely a psychological hurt, yeah? And it's not because someone has actually hurt us. How could they? If you allow for this and contemplate it and take a little time with it, you'll see it. And this is what's being shared. It says, nothing, nobody from without can hurt me inside psychologically. I recognize that I could only be hurt psychologically by my own wrong actions, which I have control over, by my own wrong reactions. They're tricky, but I have control over them too, or by my own inaction in some situations, like the present world situation, that needs action from me. So, how am I being hurt? Am I being hurt because someone said something that I didn't like? Or am I being hurt because I don't like what they said? Which is it that's hurting me psychologically?
The latter.
Yeah? Without being down on yourself, allow for this, hear it. Yeah? without falling into this self-deprecation and feeling that you're being attacked even with this. And so this is work for us, but it's not, the words that they said, they come and go. But what we make of it inside the mind psychologically is what we actually end up living with. Yeah? So, okay, now she shares the rest of it. She says, when I recognized this, when I recognized all this, when I got it, how free I felt, and I just stopped hurting myself. Mm-hmm. Now someone could do the meanest thing to me and I would feel deep compassion for this out of harmony person, this psychologically sick person who is capable of doing mean things. Why feel compassion? It's the same thing. One of us who has the capacity to say and do mean things is able to do it only because our mind has become colored in this way. And who is it that lives with our mind all the time? So if you allow for it and you allow yourself to see yourself in their situation, you'll see that their psychological illness, dis-ease, is causing them terrible suffering. And if you can see this, you'll find a place of compassion. And I hear so many beautiful stories, yes, about breakthroughs. And this is a consistent one, which is I hated this person disgusted me, I couldn't forgive them, etc., etc. And then in one moment, I felt compassion for them. I saw myself in them. I saw that they were suffering with this. Yeah. Like this. So, and in the same, and if you allow for it, if you step back from this whole tangle, all these knots for a moment, you'll see just like you wouldn't be angry, you wouldn't get yourself worked up and act or react from a place of anger with someone who has cancer or someone who's a paraplegic. You also wouldn't with someone who's saying or doing mean things. Yeah? So this is this relinquishment of negative feelings. It's switching it, allowing ourselves to see more deeply and letting go of these negative feelings which are habituated for us and bringing them back into the cleansing fire of love. Like this. And so, and I would feel deep compassion for this out of harmony person, this psychologically sick person who's capable of doing mean things. I certainly would not hurt myself with a wrong reaction of bitterness or anger. Because if I bring this, then I hurt myself because I have to live in it now. So I bring this same illness to me. Yeah. There's a beautiful quote from the Buddha. He says to be angry with someone is like trying to kill someone by drinking poison. Mm-hmm. And of course, I kill myself first. So in this way. So this explains it helps us see why I would do it. How I do it is using these tools to change the nature of thoughts, to see this isn't serving. I need to find compassion. You have complete control over whether or not you will be hurt psychologically. And at any time you want to, you can stop hurting yourself. Okay, so let's close. We'll close by chanting the Mahamrityunjaya mantra. God bless us, everyone. So much love, so much gratefulness. You are amazing. You are so bright and full of love. I wish you and all every success, absolute peace, absolute freedom, this love, everlasting, undivided love, to find this within thyself and to be able to share it and to help us all to have this healing medicine. Om Trayambakam Yajamahe Sugandhim Pushtivardhanam Urvairukamiva Bandhanan Mrichor Mukshiyamamritat. Om Trayambakam Yajamahe Sugandhim Pushtivardhanam Urvairukamiva Bandhanan Mrichor Mukshiyamamritat. Om Trayambakam Yajamahe Sugandhim Pushtivardhanam Urvairukamiva Bandhanan Mrityor Mukshiyamamritat. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Ambalo Sakar Shivananda Maharaj Ki Jai. For all the saints and sages of all the traditions. Jai. Om Om.